At you live from the beautiful heartland, these good old United States of America, right at the confluence of the mighty Mississippi and the majestic Missouri rivers, St. Charles, Missouri. This is the Rant. I am your host, Charles Lamson. Open that third eye chakra, everyone. Time to open your brow chakra with enlightening information. Okay, here we go. So, all right, today is the 13th. It's Friday, the 13th day of September. Year of our Lord, 2019. Coming at you from the beautiful heartland, these good old United States of America, right at the confluence of the mighty Mississippi and the majestic Missouri rivers, St. Charles, Missouri. Today's topic is going to be part 4 of leading human resources. In these shows, I like to do little mashups. Beginning of the show, it's going to be a seance, hence the Tibetan bull music. We're going to call forth the spirit of Alfred Marshall. Died in 1920, but we're going to have a seance here and summon his spirit to be with us and teach us of his principles of economics. As usual, I'm going to have a whole team of well, this was a very long project, but I've managed to somehow get the help of a whole team of mediums that are helping me with this one. So we're going to channel his spirit. He's going to talk about his principles of economics. Also, I'm going to be doing inspirational, motivational, crippled-guy, 50-year-old fitness video, instructional video. That's right, okay. So I mangled it all up. But anyway, I'm going to be using the lightweight. I'll be doing lots of reps, keeping it going for like 45, 50 minutes. And I take breaks in between sets. And that's like I do count 30 respirations. So that's roughly 60 seconds. And so then I do that for about 45, 50 minutes. And then we're going to come back in the second half. And I'm going to be giving forth some tips, strategies for all you people who are into management stuff or the behavioral sciences. So you'll definitely want to stay tuned for that. All right, but without further ado, let's get this shindig started. Alfred, are you there? Please help us. Please.
Partial monopoly branch of industry. He will so regulate his increased output that his monopoly profits increase. But then such improvements are not confined to one or two producers, when they arise from a general increase in demand and output which corresponds to it, or from improved methods or machinery that are accessible to the whole industry, or from advances made by subsidiary industries, and increased external economies generally, then the prices of the products will keep close to a level which yields only a normal rate of profits to that class of industry. And in the process, the industry is likely to have passed over to a class in which the normal rate of profits is lower than its old class, because there is in it more uniformity and monotony, and less mental strain than before. And though this is nearly the same thing in other words, because it is more suited to joint stock management. Thus, a general increase in the proportion which the quantity of product bears to the quantity of labor and capital in an industry is likely to be accompanied by a fall in the rate of profits, which may, from some points of view, be regarded as a diminishing return measured in values. Part 3. We now pass from profit per annum and examine the causes that govern profit on the turnover. It is obvious that while the normal rate of profit per annum varies within narrow limits, the profit on the turnover may vary very widely from one branch of trade to another, because it depends on the length of time and amount of work required for the turnover. Thus, wholesale dealers who buy and sell large quantities of produce in single transactions and who are able to turn over their capital very rapidly may make large fortunes, though their average profit on the turnover is less than 1%, and in the extreme case of large stock exchange dealings, even that is only a small fraction of 1%. But a shipbuilder who has to put labor and material into the ship and to provide a berth for it a long while before it is ready for sale, and who has to take care for every detail connected with it, must add a very high percentage to his direct and indirect outlay in order to remunerate him for his labor and the locking up of his capital. Again, in the textile industry, some firms buy raw material and turn out finished goods, while others confine themselves to spinning, to weaving, or to finishing. It is obvious that the rate of profit on the turnover of one of the first class must be equal to the sum of the rates of profit of one of each of the three other classes. Again, the retail dealer's profit on the turnover is often only 5 or 10% for commodities which are in general demand and which are not subject to changes of fashion. So that while the sales are large, the necessary stocks are small, and the capital invested in them can be turned over very rapidly with very little trouble and no risk. But a profit on the turnover of nearly 100% is required to remunerate the retailer of some kinds of fancy goods which can be sold but slowly, of which various stocks must be kept, which require a large place for the display, and which a change of fashion may render unsellable except at a loss. And even this high rate is often exceeded in the case of fish, fruit, flowers, and vegetables. Part 4. We see then there is no general tendency of profits on the turnover to equality. There may be, and as a matter of fact, there is in each trade and in every branch of each trade a more or less definite rate of profits on the turnover which is regarded as a fair or normal rate. Of course, these rates are always changing in consequence of changes in the method of trade, which are frequently begun by individuals who desire to do a larger trade at a lower rate of profit on the turnover that has been customary, but at a larger rate of profit per annum on their capital. If, however, there happens to be no great change of this kind going on, the traditions of the trade that a certain rate of profit on the turnover should be charged for a particular class of work are of great practical service to those in the trade. Such traditions are the outcome of much experience tending to show that if that rate is charged, a proper allowance will be made for all the costs, supplementary as well as prime, incurred for that particular purpose, and in addition, the normal rate of profits per annum in that class of business will be afforded. If they change the price which gives much less than this rate of profit on the turnover, they can hardly prosper. If they charge a price which gives much less than this rate of profit on the turnover, they can hardly prosper. And if they charge much more, they are in danger of losing their custom, since others can afford to undersell them. This is the fair rate of profit on the turnover which an honest man is expected to charge for making goods to order when no price has been agreed on beforehand, and it is the rate which a court of law will allow in case a dispute should arise between buyer and seller. Part 5. During all this inquiry, we have had in view chiefly the ultimate or long period or true normal results of economic forces. We have considered the way in which supply of business ability in command of capital tends in the long run to adjust itself to the demand. We have seen how it seeks constantly every business and every method of conducting every business in which it can render services that are so highly valued by persons who are able to pay good prices for the satisfaction of their wants, and those services will, in the long run, earn a high reward. The motive force in the competition of undertakers, each one tries every opening, forecasting probable future events, reducing them to their true relative proportions, and considering what surplus is likely to be afforded by the receipts of any undertaking over the outlay required for it. All his prospective gains enter into the profits which draw him towards the undertaking. All the investments of his capital and energies in making the appliances for future production and in building up the immaterial capital of a business connection have to show themselves to him as likely to be profitable before he will enter on them. The whole of the profit which he expects from them enter into the reward which he expects in the long run for his venture. And if he is a man of normal ability, normal that is for that class of work, and is on the margin of doubt whether to make the venture or not, they may be taken as true representative of the marginal normal expenses of production of the services in question. Thus the whole of the normal profits enter into true or long period supply price. The motives which induce a man and his father to invest capital and labor in preparing him for his work as an artisan, as a professional man, or as a businessman are similar to those which lead to the investment of capital and labor in building up the material plant and the organization of a business. In each case, the investment, so far as man's action is governed by deliberate motive at all, is carried up to that margin at which any further investment appears to offer no balance of gain, no excess or surplus of utility or disutility, and the price that is expected as a reward for all this investment is therefore a part of the normal expenses of production of services rendered by it. A long period of time is however needed in order to get the full operation of all these causes, so that exceptional success may be balanced against exceptional failure. On the one hand are those who succeed abundantly because they turn out to have rare ability or rare good fortune either in the particular incidents of their speculative enterprises or in meeting with a favorable opportunity for the general development of their business. And on the other are those who are mentally or morally incapable of making good use of their training and their favorable start in life, who have no special aptitude for their calling, whose speculations are unfortunate, and whose businesses are cramped by the encroachment of rivals, or left stranded by the tide of demand receding from them and flowing in some other direction. Although these disturbing causes may thus be neglected in problems relating to normal earnings and normal value, they assume the first rank and exert a predominating influence with regard to the incomes earned by particular individuals at particular times. And since these disturbing causes affect profits and the earnings of management in very different ways from those in which they affect ordinary earnings, there is a scientific necessity for treating differently profits and ordinary earnings when we are discussing temporary fluctuations and individual incidents. Questions relating to market fluctuations cannot indeed be properly handled till the theories of money, credit, and foreign trade have been discussed. But even at this stage, we may note the following contrast between the ways in which disturbing causes such as we have just described affect profits and ordinary earnings. Part 6. In the first place, the undertaker's profits bear the first brunt of any change in the price of those things which are the product of his capital, including his business organization, of his labor, and of the labor of his employees. And as a result, fluctuations of his profits generally precede fluctuations of their wages. and are much more extensive. For other things being equal, a comparatively small rise in the price for which he can sell his product is not unlikely to increase his profit manifold, perhaps to substitute a profit for a loss. That rise will make him eager to reap the harvest of good prices while he can, and he will be in fear that his employees will leave him or refuse to work. He will therefore be more able and more willing to pay the high wages, and wages will tend upwards. But experience shows that, whether they are governed by sliding scales or not, they seldom rise as much in proportion as prices, and therefore they do not rise nearly as much as in proportion as profits. Another aspect of the same fact is that when trade is bad, the employee at worst is earning nothing towards the support of himself and his family. The employer's outgoings are likely to exceed his incomings, particularly if he is using much borrowed capital. In that case, even his gross earnings of management are a negative quantity. That is, he is losing his capital. In very bad times, this happens to a great number, perhaps the majority of undertakers, and it happens almost constantly to those who are less fortunate, or less able, or less well fitted to their special trade than others. Part 7. To pass to another point, the number of those who succeed in business is but a small percentage of the whole, and in their hands are concentrated the fortunes of others several times as numerous as themselves, who have made savings of their own, or who have inherited the savings of others and lost them all, together with the fruits of their own efforts in unsuccessful business. In order, therefore, to find the average profits of a trade, we must not divide the aggregate profits made in it by the number of those who are reaping them, nor even by that number added to the number which have failed. But from the aggregate profits of the successful, we must subtract the aggregate losses of those who have failed and perhaps disappeared from the trade, and we must then divide the remainder by the sum of the numbers of those who have succeeded and those who have failed. It is probable that the true gross earnings of management, that is, the excess of profits over interest, is not on the average more than a half, and in some risky trades not more than a tenth part, of which it appears to be to persons to whom the estimate of the profitableness of a trade by observation only of those who have secured its prices. There are, however, as we shall presently see, reasons for thinking that the risks of trade are on the whole diminishing rather than increasing. Part 8. We will pass to another difference between the fluctuations of profits and ordinary earnings. We have seen that before free capital and labor have been invested in securing the skill required for the work of the artisan or professional man, the income expected to be derived from them is of the nature of profits, though the rate of such profits which is required is often high for two reasons. The people who make the outlay do not themselves reap the greater part of the reward arising from it, and they are frequently in straitened circumstances and not able to invest for a distant return without great self-denial. And we have seen that when the artisan or professional man has once obtained the skill required for his work, a part of his earnings are for the future really a quasi-rent of the capital and labor invested in fitting him for his work, in obtaining his start in life, his business connections, and generally his opportunity for turning his faculties to good account. And only the remainder of his income is true earnings of effort. But this remainder is generally a large part of the whole. And here lies the contrast. For when a similar analysis is made of the profits of the businessman, the proportions are found to be different. In his case, the greater part is quasi-rent. The income, When the undertaker of business on a large scale gets from the capital, material and immaterial invested in his business is so great and liable to such violent fluctuations from a considerable negative to a large considerable quantity that he often thinks very little of his own labor in the matter. If profitable business opens out to him, he regards the harvest accruing from it as almost pure gain. There is so little difference between the trouble of having his business on his hands only partially active, full capacity, that as a rule it scarcely occurs to him to set off his own extra labor as a deduction from those gains. They do not present themselves to his mind as to any considerable extent earnings purchased by extra fatigue, in the same way as the extra earnings got by working overtime due to the artisan. This fact is the chief cause, and to some extent the justification, of the imperfect recognition by the general public and even by some economists of the fundamental unity underlying the causes that determine normal profits and normal wages. Closely allied to the preceding difference is another. When an artisan or a professional man has exceptional natural abilities which are not made by human effort and are not the result of sacrifices undergone for a future gain, they enable him to obtain a surplus income over what ordinary persons could expect from similar exertions, falling on similar investments of capital and labor in their education and start in life, a surplus which is of the nature of rent. But to revert to a point mentioned at the end of last chapter, the class of business undertakers contains a disproportionately large number of persons with high natural ability, since, in addition to the able men born within its ranks, it includes also a large share of the best natural abilities born in the lower ranks of industry. And thus, while profits on capital invested in education is a especially important element in the incomes of professional men taken as a class, the rent of rare natural abilities may be regarded as a especially important element in the incomes of businessmen, so long as we consider them as individuals. In relation to normal value, the earnings even of rare abilities are, as we have seen, to be regarded rather as a quasi-rent than as a rent proper. But there are exceptions to this rule. The humdrum businessman who has inherited a good business and has just sufficient force to keep it together may reap an income of many thousands a year, which contains very little rent of rare natural qualities, and, on the other hand, the greater part of incomes earned by exceptionally successful barristers and writers and painters and singers and jockeys may be classed as the rent of rare natural abilities, so long at least we regard them as individuals and are not considering the dependence of the normal supply of labor in the several occupations on the prospects of brilliant success that they hold out to aspiring youth. The income of a particular business is often very much affected by changes in its industrial environment and opportunity or conjecture, but similar influences affect the special income derived from the skill of many classes of workers. The discovery of rich copper mines in America and Australia lowered the earning power of skill of Cornish miners, so long as they stayed at home, and every new discovery of rich mines in the new districts raised the earning power of the skill of those miners who had already gone there. And again, the growth of a taste for theatrical amusements while raising the normal earnings of actors and inducing an increased supply of the skill raises the earning power of the skill of those already in profession, a great part of which is, from the point of view of the individual, a producer's surplus due to rare natural qualities. Part 9. Next, let us consider in relation to one another the interests of different industrial classes engaged in the same trade. This solidarity is a special case of the general fact that the demand for the several factors of production of any commodity is a joint demand. And we will refer back to the illustration of the general fact which is given in Book 5, Chapter 6, where they saw how a change in the supply of, say, plasterers, labor, would affect the interests of all other branches of the building trades in the same way, but much more intensely than it would the general public. The fact is that the incomes derived from the specialized capital and the specialized skill belonging to all the various industrial classes engaged in producing houses or calico or anything else depend very much on the general prosperity of the trade. And so far as this is the case, they may be regarded for short periods as shares of a composite or joint income of the whole trade. The share of each class tends to rise when this aggregate income is increased by an increase in their own efficiency or by any external cause. But when the aggregate income is stationary and any one class gets a better share than before, it must be at the expense of the others. This is true of the whole body of those engaged in any trade. It is true in a special sense of those who have spent a great part of their lives in working together in the same business establishment. Part 10. The earnings of a successful business, looked at from the point of view of the businessman himself, are the aggregate of the earnings, firstly, of his own ability, secondly, of his plant and other material capital, and thirdly, of his goodwill or business organization and connection. But really, it is more than the sum of these, for his efficiency depends partly on his being in that particular business, and if he were to sell it at a fair price and then engage himself in another business, his income would probably be diminished. The whole value of his business connection to him when working it is a notable instance of conjuncture of opportunity value. It is mainly a product of ability in labor, though good fortune may have contributed to it. That part which is transferable and may be bought by a private individual or by a large amalgamation of firms must be entered among their costs, and in a sense a conjuncture or opportunity cost. The point of view of the employer, however, does not include the whole gains of the business, for there is another part which attaches to his employees. Indeed, in some cases and for some purposes, nearly the whole income of a business may be regarded as a quasi-rent, that is, an income determined for the time by the state of the market for its wares, with but little reference to the cost of preparing for their work the various things and persons engaged in it. In other words, it is a composite quasi-rent divisible among the different persons in the business by bargaining, supplemented by custom and by notions of fairness, results which are brought about by causes that bear some analogy to those that, in early forms of civilization, have put the producer's surplus from the land almost permanently into the hands not of single individuals, but of cultivating firms. Thus, the head clerk in a business has an acquaintance with men and things, the use of which he could in some cases sell at a high price to rival firms, but in other cases it is of a kind to be of no value save to the business in which he already is. And then his departure would perhaps injure it by several times the value of his salary, while probably he would not get half that salary elsewhere. It is to see how the position of such employees differs from that of others, whose services would be of almost equal value to any business in a large trade. The income of one of these in any week consists, as we have seen, partly of a recompense for the fatigue incurred by the work of that week, and partly of a quasi-rent of his specialized skill and ability, and, assuming competition to be perfectly efficient, this quasi-rent is determined by the price which either his present employers or any other would be willing to pay for its services in the state in which the market for their wares is during that week. The prices that have to be paid for given work of a given kind being thus determined by the general conditions of the trade. These prices enter into the direct outgoings which have to be deducted from its gross earnings in order to ascertain the quasi rent of this particular firm at the time. But in the rise or fall of that quasi rent, the employees would have no share. In fact, however, competition is not thus perfectly efficient, in where the same price is paid all over the market for the same work, the same machinery. The prosperity of a firm increases the chance of advancement for each of its employees, and also his chance of continuous employment when trade is slack, and much coveted over time when trade is good. Thus, there is de facto some sort of profit and loss sharing between almost every business and its employees, and perhaps this is in its very highest form when, without being embodied in a definite contract, the solidarity of interest between those who work together in the same business is recognized with cordial generosity as the result of true brotherly feeling. But such cases are not very common, and as a rule, the relations between employers and employed are raised to a higher plane both economically and morally by the adoption of the system of profit sharing, especially when it is regarded as but a step towards the still higher but much more difficult level of true cooperation. If the employers in any trade act together, and so do the employed, the solution of the problem of wages becomes indeterminate. There is nothing but bargaining to decide the exact shares in which the excess of its incomings over its outgoings for the time should be divided between employers and employed. Leaving out of account industries which are being superseded, no lowering of wages will be permanently in the interest of employers, which drives many skilled workers to other markets or even to other industries in which they abandon the special earnings of skill. And wages must be high enough in an average year to attract young people to the trade. This sets lower limits to wages, and upper limits are set by corresponding necessities as to supply of capital and business power. But what point between these limits should be taken at any time can be decided only by higgling and bargaining, which are, however, likely to be tempered somewhat by ethico-prudential considerations, especially if there be a good code of conciliation in the trade. The problem is in practice even more complex, for each group of employees is likely to have its own union and to fight for its own hand. The employers act as buffers, but a strike for higher wages on the part of one group may, in effect, deplete the wages of some other group almost as much as the employer's profits. This is not a fitting place for a study of the causes and effects of trade combinations and of alliances and counter-alliances among employers and employed, as well as among traders and manufacturers. They present a succession of picturesque incidents and romantic transformations which arrest public attention and seem to indicate a coming change of our social arrangements, now in one direction and now in another. And their importance is certainly great and grows rapidly, but it is apt to be exaggerated, for indeed, many of them are little more than eddies, such as have always fluttered over the surface of progress. And though they are on a larger and more imposing scale in this modern age than before, yet now as ever, the main body of movement depends on the deep, silent, strong stream of the tendencies of normal distribution and exchange, which are not seen, but which control the course of those episodes which are seen. For even in conciliation and arbitration, the central difficulty is to discover what is at normal level from which the decisions of the court must not depart far under penalty of destroying their own authority. End of chapter 8. Recording by Ashwin Jain.
Chapter 9 of Principles of Economics, Book 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Stephanie Nance. Principles of Economics, Book 6 by Alfred Marshall. Chapter 9, Rent of Land. Section 1. It has been argued in Book 5 that the rent of land is no unique fact, but simply the chief species of a large genus of economic phenomena, and that the theory of the rent of land is no isolated economic doctrine, but merely one of the chief applications of a particular corollary from the general theory of demand and supply, that there is a continuous gradation from the true rent of those free gifts which have been appropriated by man through the income derived from permanent improvements of the soil to those yielded by farm and factory buildings, steam engines, and less durable goods. In this and the following chapter, we are to make a special study of the net income of land. That study has two parts. One part relates to the total quantity of the net income or producer surplus from land. The other to the way in which this income is distributed between those who have an interest in the land. The first is general, whatever be the form of land tenure. We will begin with it and suppose that the cultivation of the land is undertaken by its owner. We may call to mind that the land has an inherent income of heat and light and air and rain, which man cannot greatly affect, and advantages of situation, many of which are wholly beyond his control, while but few of the remainder are the direct result of the investment of capital and effort in the land by its individual owners. These are the chief of its properties, the supply of which is not dependent on human effort, and which would therefore not be increased by extra rewards to that effort, and a tax on which would always fall exclusively on the owners. On the other hand, those chemical or mechanical properties of the soil, on which its fertility largely depends, can be modified, and in extreme cases entirely changed by man's action. But a tax on the income derived from improvements which, though capable of general application, are yet slowly made and slowly exhausted, would not appreciably affect the supply of them during a short period, nor therefore the supply of produce due to them. It would consequently fall in the main on the owner, a leaseholder being regarded for the time as an owner, subject to a mortgage. In a long period, however, it would diminish the supply of them, would raise the normal supply price of produce, and fall on the consumer. Section 2. Now let us revert to our study of the tendency to diminishing return in agriculture in the fourth book, still supposing that the owner of the land undertakes its cultivation, so that our reasoning may be general and independent of the incidence of particular forms of land tenure. We saw how the return to successive doses of capital and labor, though it may increase for the first few doses, will begin to diminish when the land is already well cultivated. The cultivator continues to apply additional capital and labor till he reaches a point at which the return is only just sufficient to repay his outlay and reward him for his own work. That will be the dose on the margin of cultivation, whether it happens to be applied to rich or to poor land. An amount equal to the return to it will be required and will be sufficient to repay him for each of his previous doses. The excess of the gross produce over this amount is his producer's surplus. He looks forward as far as he can, but it is seldom possible to look forward very far, and at any given time he takes for granted all that richness of the soil which results from permanent improvements, and the income, or quasi-rent, derived from these improvements, together with that due to the original qualities of the soil, constitutes his producer's surplus, or rent. Henceforth, it is only the income derived from new investments that appears as earnings and profits. He carries these new investments up to the margin of profitableness, and his producer's surplus, or rent, is the excess of the gross income from the improved land over what is required to remunerate him for the fresh doses of capital and labor he annually supplies. This surplus depends on, firstly, the richness of the land, and secondly, the relative values of those things which he has to sell, and of those things which he needs to buy. The richness or fertility of the land, we have seen, cannot be measured absolutely, for it varies with the nature of the crops raised and with the methods and intensity of cultivation. Two pieces of land cultivated even by the same man with equal expenditures of capital and labor are likely, if they yield equal crops of barley, to give unequal crops of wheat. If they return equal crops of wheat when cultivated slightly or in a primitive fashion, they are likely to yield unequal crops when cultivated intensively or on modern methods. Further, the prices at which the various requisites of the farm can be bought and its various products sold depend on the industrial environment, and changes in that are continually changing the relative values of different crops, and therefore the relative values of land in different situations. Lastly, we suppose the cultivator to be of normal ability relatively to the task he has undertaken and the circumstances of time and place. If he is of less ability, his actual gross produce will be less than that which normally should come from the land. It will be yielding to him less than its true producer's surplus. If, on the contrary, he is of more than normal ability, he will be getting, in addition to the producer's surplus due to the land, some producer's surplus due to rare ability. Section 3. We have already traced in some detail the way in which a rise in the value of agricultural produce increases the producer's surplus, measured in terms of produce from all lands, but especially from those where the tendency to diminishing returns acts but feebly. We have seen that, generally speaking, it raises the value of poor lands relatively to rich, or, in other words, that if a person anticipates a rise in the value of produce, he may expect a larger future income from investing a given sum of money in poor land at present prices than from investing it in rich land. Next, the real value of the producer's surplus, i.e., its value measured in terms of general purchasing power, will rise relatively to its produce value, in the same ratio as the value of produce measured in the same way has risen. That is to say, a rise in the value of produce causes a double rise in the value of producer's surplus. The term, the real value of produce, is indeed ambiguous. Historically, it has most often been used to mean the real value from the point of view of the consumer. This use is rather dangerous, for there are some purposes for which it is better to consider real value from the point of view of the producer. But with this caution, we may use the term labor value to express the amount of labor of a given kind that the produce will purchase, and real value to mean the amount of necessaries, comforts, and luxuries of life that a given amount of produce will purchase. A rise in the labor value of raw produce may imply an increasing pressure of population on the means of subsistence, and a rise of the producer's surplus from land due to that cause goes together with, and is a sort of measure of, the degradation of the people. But if, on the other hand, the rise in the real value of raw produce has been caused by an improvement of the arts of production other than agricultural, it will probably be accompanied by a rise in the purchasing power of wages. Section 4. In all this, it has been clear that the producer's surplus from land is not evidence of the greatness of the bounty of nature, as was held by the physiocrats and in a more modified form by Adam Smith. It is evidence of the limitations of that bounty. But it must be remembered that inequalities of situation relatively to the best markets are just as powerful causes of inequalities of producer's surplus, as are inequalities of absolute productiveness. This truth and its chief consequences, many of which seem now so obvious, were first made manifest by Ricardo. He delighted to argue that no surplus can be reaped from the ownership of those of nature's gifts, the supply of which is everywhere practically unlimited, and in particular, that there would be no surplus from land if there were an unlimited supply of it, all equally fertile and all equally accessible. He carried this argument further and showed that an improvement in the arts of cultivation, equally applicable to all soils, which is equivalent to a general increase in the natural fertility of land, will be nearly sure to lower the aggregate corn surplus and quite sure to lower the aggregate real surplus derived from the land that supplies a given population with raw produce. He also pointed out that, if the improvements affected chiefly those lands that were already the richest, it might raise the aggregate surplus, but that if it affected chiefly the poorer class of land, it would lower that aggregate very much. It is quite consistent with this proposition to admit that an improvement in the arts of cultivation of the land of England now would raise the aggregate surplus from her land, because it would increase the produce without materially lowering its price, unless it were accompanied by a similar improvement in those countries from which she imports raw produce, or, which comes to the same thing for this purpose, by an improvement in the means of communication with them. And as Ricardo himself says, improvements that apply equally to all the land supplying the same market, as they give a great stimulus to population, and at the same time enable us to cultivate poorer lands with less labor, are ultimately of immense advantage to the landlords. There is some interest in the attempt to distinguish that part of the value of land which is the result of man's labor from that which is due to the original bounty of nature. Part of its value is caused by highways and other improvements that were made for the general purposes of the country and are not a special charge on its agriculture. Counting these in, List, Carey, Bastia, and others contend that the expense of bringing land from its original to its present condition would exceed the whole value it has now, and hence they argue that all of its value is due to man's labor. Their facts may be disputed, but they are really not relevant to their conclusions. What is wanted for their argument is that the present value of land should not exceed the expense, insofar as it can properly be charged to agricultural account, of bringing the land from its original condition to one in which it would be as fertile and generally useful for agricultural purposes as it now is. Many of the changes wrought in it were made to suit agricultural methods that are long since obsolete, and some of them even deduct from, rather than add to, the value of the land. And further, the expenses of making the change must be the net expenses after adding indeed interest on the gradual outlay, but also after deducting the aggregate value of the extra produce which has, from first to last, been attributable to the improvement. The value of land in a well-peopled district is generally much greater than these expenses, and often many times as great. Section 5. The argument of this chapter so far is applicable to all systems of land tenure which recognize private ownership of land in any form, for it is concerned with that producer surplus which accrues to the owner if he cultivates his land himself, or if he does not, then accrues to him and his tenants, regarded as a firm engaged in the business of cultivation. Thus, it holds true, whatever be the division which custom or law or contract may have arranged between them with regard to their several shares of the cost of cultivation on the one hand, and the fruits of the cultivation on the other. The greater part of it is also independent of the stage of economic development which has been reached, and it is valid even if little or no produce is sent to market, and dues are levied in kind, and so on. At the present day, in those parts of England where custom and sentiment count for least, and free competition and enterprise for most in the bargaining for the use of land, it is commonly understood that the landlord supplies, and in some measure maintains, those improvements which are slowly made and slowly worn out. That being done, he requires of his tenant the whole producer's surplus, which the land thus equipped is estimated to afford in a year of normal harvests and normal prices, after deducting enough to replace the farmer's capital with normal profits, the farmer standing to lose in bad years and gain in good years. In this estimate, it is implicitly assumed that the farmer is a man of normal ability and enterprise for that class of holding, and therefore, if he rises above that standard, he will himself reap the benefit, and if he falls below it, will himself bear the loss, and perhaps ultimately leave the farm. In other words, that part of the income derived from the land which the landlord obtains is governed for all periods of moderate length, mainly by the market for the produce, with but little reference to the cost of providing the various agents employed in raising it, and it therefore is of the nature of a rent. and that part which the tenant retains is to be regarded, even for short periods, as profits entering directly into the normal price of the produce, because the produce would not be raised unless it were expected to yield those profits. The more fully, therefore, the distinctively English features of land tenure are developed, the more nearly it is true that the line of division between the tenants and the landlord's share coincides with the deepest and most important line of cleavage in economic theory. This fact, perhaps more than any other, was the cause of the ascendancy of English economic theory early in the century. It helped English economists to pioneer the way so far ahead that even in our own generation, when as much intellectual activity has been devoted to economic studies in other countries as in England, nearly all the new constructive ideas are found to be but developments of others which were latent in the older English work. The fact itself appears accidental, but perhaps it was not, for this particular line of cleavage involves less friction, less waste of time and trouble in checks and counterchecks than any other. It may be doubted whether the so-called English system will endure. It has great disadvantages, and it may not be found the best in a future stage of civilization. But when we come to compare it with other systems, we shall see that it afforded great advantages to a country which pioneered the way for the world in the development of free enterprise, and which therefore was impelled early to adopt all such changes as give freedom and vigor, elasticity, and strength. End of chapter 9. Recording by Stephanie Nance. Principles of Economics, Book 6 by Alfred Marshall.
Chapter 10 of Principles of Economics, Book 6, Part 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Principles of Economics, Book 6 by Alfred Marshall, Chapter 10. Land tenure. 1. In early times and in some backward countries, even in our own age, all rights to property depend on general understandings rather than on precise laws and documents. Insofar as these understandings can be reduced to definite terms and expressed in the language of modern business, they are generally to the following effect. The ownership of land is vested not in an individual, but in a firm of which one member or group of members is the sleeping partner, while another member or group of members, parenthesis open, it may be a whole family, parenthesis close, is the working partner. Note 104. The sleeping partner is sometimes the ruler of the state. Sometimes he is an individual who inherits what was once the duty of collecting the payments due to this ruler from the cultivators of a certain part of the soil. But what, in the course of silent time, has become a right of ownership, more or less definite, more or less absolute. If, as is generally the case, he retains the duty to make certain payments to the ruler of the state, the partnership may be regarded as containing 3 members, of whom 2 are sleeping partners. Note 105. The sleeping partner, or one of them, is generally called the proprietor, or landholder, or landlord, or even the landowner. But this is an incorrect way of speaking. When he is restrained by law or by custom, which has nearly the force of law, from turning the cultivator out of the golden by an arbitrary increase of the payments exacted from him or by any other means. In that case, the property in the land vests not in him alone, but in the whole of the firm, of which he is only the sleeping partner. The payment made by the working partner is not a rent at all, but is that fixed sum, or that part of the gross proceeds, as the case may be, which the constitution of the firm binds him to pay. And insofar as the custom or law which regulates these payments is fixed and unalterable, the theory of rent has but little direct application. 2. But in fact, the payments and dues, which custom is supposed to stereotype, nearly always contain elements which are incapable of precise definition, while the accounts of them handed down by tradition are embodied in loose and vague impressions, or at best are expressed in words that make no attempt at scientific exactness. Note 106. We can watch the influence of this vagueness in the agreements between landlord and tenant, even in modern England, for they have always been interpreted by the aid of customs, which have ever been imperceptibly growing and dwindling again to meet the changing exigencies of successive generations. We change our customs more quickly than our forefathers did, and we are more conscious of our changes and more willing to convert our customs into legal enactments and to make them uniform. Note 107. At the present day, in spite of minute legislation and carefully drawn agreements, there remains a wide margin of uncertainty as to the amount of capital which the landlord will from time to time invest in maintaining and extending the farm buildings and other improvements. It is in these matters, quite as much as in his direct money relations with the tenant, that the generous and liberal landlord shows himself. And what is especially important.
Okay, all right, Alfred. Thank you very much. Alfred Marshall, Spirit of Alfred Marshall. It's time to close this seance, ladies and gentlemen, or I have to officially close it in an occult manner, occult ritual manner, or his spirit will just hang around on earth until I call him forth, so I have to go. Begone, spirit! Back to the depths of hell, where you belong, Alfred Marshall. An economist hell. No, I don't know if he belongs in hell or not. I really don't know much about the guy's personal life, so I don't know. I mean, he was an ivory tower intellectual, so you can bet he was pure evil. But they're all a bunch of baby eaters. These upper levels of the ivory tower, at the upper levels of the intellectual ivory tower. Oh shoot! Get the call in. Oh shoot! All right. Anywho. All right. So yeah, back to hell with you. till I call ye forth again. Alfred. Oh, that might have been, I think that was his spirit fighting me. But no, I'm too powerful for him. Back to hell with you! Spirit be gone. Till I call ye forth on the next show. All right. Now we're talking about leading human resources. This is all based on an analysis of a book I read recently on my blog. It's all there on the blog if you want to check it out. It's charleslamson.blogspot.com. charleslamson.blogspot.com. Check it out. Interaction style of interaction of style and leadership. Okay, this is what it kind of ended with in the last show. I believe it was last Saturday. And then supervisors. We had positional goals. Oh. Supervisor style expectations. Okay, so talks a little bit. Just to recap here. Okay, we're talking about the interaction of style and leadership. In the last episode, talked a little bit about leaders' style and expectations, which segued us into what we're going to be talking about today. Followers style, or where I'm going to start off talking about followers, styles, and expectations. The styles of followers are an important consideration for leaders in appraising their situation. In fact, as Fillmore Sanford indicated, there is some justification for regarding the followers as the most crucial factor in any leadership event. Followers in any situation are vital, not only because individually they accept or reject the leader, but because as a group they actually determine whatever personal power that leader will have. If the follower decides not to follow, it really doesn't matter what the other elements in the situation are. This is an important aspect of all levels of management. Victor H. Room uncovered evidence that the effectiveness of a leader is dependent to a great extent on the style of the individual workers. Saul Gellerman also stressed the importance of the workers. And here's a quote from Saul. Saul place a group with strong independence drives under supervisors who need to keep the group under their thumb, and the result is very likely to be trouble. Similarly, if you take a docile team who is accustomed to obedience and respect for their supervisors and place them under supervisors who try to make them manage their own work, they are likely to wonder uneasily whether the supervisors really know what they're doing. Tannenbaum and Schmidt argued that a leader can permit followers greater freedom if the following essential conditions exist. If the followers have relatively high needs for independence, if the followers have a readiness to assume responsibility for decision making, if they have a relatively high tolerance for ambiguity, if they are interested in the problem and feel it is important, if they understand and identify with the goals of the organization. So once again, these are Okay, you can permit followers greater freedom if these conditions exist. If they are interested in the problem and feel it is important, if they understand and identify with the goals of the organization, if they have the necessary knowledge and experience to deal with the problem, if they have learned to expect to share in decision making. Even though managers would prefer to change their followers' styles, they may find that they must adapt, at least temporarily, to the followers' current behavior. For example, a supervisor who wants followers to take more responsibility and to operate under a general rather than close supervision cannot expect this kind of change to take place overnight. A supervisor's current behavior, at least to some extent, must be compatible with the current expectations of the group. With planned change taking place after a long-term period, we have seen numerous examples of the need for this kind of diagnosis in schools where humanistic teachers have tried to turn over significant responsibility to students without recognizing that many of these students expect teachers to tell them what to do. This rapid change in style often produces irresponsibility rather than more student initiative. Heidler-Bracey has suggested that leaders need to manage from the heart. Heart being an acronym for H, hear and understand me. E, even if you disagree with me, please do not make me wrong. A, acknowledge the greatness within me. R, remember to look for my good intentions. T, tell me the truth with understanding. Managing from the heart, HERT, can promote increased honesty in supervisor-employee relationships, increasing job satisfaction through personal empowerment, and give your organization a tangible competitive edge. Leaders, especially leaders who are new in their position, should know the expectations that followers have about the way they should behave in certain situations. A predecessor's leader behavior style is still a powerful influence. If this style is different from the new leader's style, this difference may create an immediate problem. Leaders must either change their style to coincide with followers' exceptions or change followers' expectations. Because the style of leaders often has been developed over a long period of time, it can be difficult for them to make any drastic changes in the short run. It may, therefore, be more effective if leaders concentrate on changing the expectations of their followers. Supervisors' style and expectations. Another element of the environment is the leadership style of one's supervisor. By supervisor, we mean the leader's leader. Just about everyone has a supervisor of one kind or another. Most managers give considerable attention to supervising followers, but some do not pay enough attention to being a follower themselves. Yet, meeting the supervisor's expectations is often an important factor affecting one's style, particularly if one's supervisor is located close by. If a supervisor is very task-oriented, for example, the supervisor might expect followers to operate in the same manner. Relationship-oriented behavior might be evaluated as inappropriate without even considering results. This rigid thinking has become This rigid thinking has become evident when first-line supervisors are sent to training programs to improve their human relations skills. Upon returning to the company, they try to implement some of these new ideas. But their own supervisors who have not accepted these concepts become impatient with the first line supervisor's newfound concern for people. Joe, cut out all that talking with the workers and get the work done. With such reactions, it would not take this first line supervisor long to revert to the previous style, and in the future, it will be much more difficult to implement any behavioral change. Associate styles and expectations. A leader's associates or peers are those individuals who have similar positions within the organization. For example, the associates of a vice president for production are the other vice presidents in the company. The associates of a teacher would be other teachers, yet not all associates are significant for leaders. Only those they interact with regularly have an impact on their style and effectiveness. The style and expectations of one's associates are important when a leader has frequent interactions with them, such as a situation that involves trading and bargaining for resources. Organization styles and expectations. The style and expectations of an organization are determined by the history and tradition of the organization, as well as by the organizational goals. Organizational goals. Okay, let me take that from the top. Organization styles and expectations. The style and expectations of an organization are determined by the history and tradition of the organization, as well as by the organizational goals and objectives that reflect the style and expectations of current top management. Over a period of time, an organization, much like an individual, becomes characterized by certain modes of behavior that are perceived as its style. The development of an organizational style or corporate image has been referred to as the process of institutionalization. In this process, the organization is infused with a system of values that reflects its history and the people who have played vital roles in its formation and growth. Thus, it is difficult to understand Ford Motor Company without knowing the impact but Henry Ford had on its Thus, it is difficult to understand Ford Motor Company without knowing the impact that Henry Ford had on its foundation. Some organizations, for example, hold to the notion that the desirable executive is one who is dynamic, imaginative, decisive, and persuasive. Other organizations put more emphasis on the importance of the executive's ability to work effectively with people, human relation skills. Members of the organization soon become conscious of the value system operating within the institution and guide their actions from many expectations derived from those values. The organization's expectations are most often expressed in forms of policies, operating procedures, and controls, as well as in informal customs and mores developed over time. All right, going to have to take a quick break. Thank you, Tibetan monks. Okay. Your relation skills developed over time. What's going on here? Okay, here we go. Let's go to organizational goals. Measured, such as net profits, annual earnings, and win-loss records. On the other hand, intervening variables consist of those long-run goals reflecting the internal condition of the organization that cannot easily be measured, such as its capacity for effective interaction, communication, and decision-making. By the way, you want to call in, be a part of the big show, please feel free. That number is, guest call in is 657-383-1825. 657-383-1825. So it goes for the YouTubers as well. You can call in, YouTubers and Blog Talk Radio people. If you're listening, happen to be out there listening live, you have a burning desire to call about these management tips and strategies I'm discussing, please feel free to give us a call. All right, so we got Joseph Batten, an author of 14 books on leadership and quality management. Let's get guest call in. Caller lines wide open, 657-383-1825. Okay, anyway, Joseph Batten, an author of 14 books on leadership and quality management. Let's see what we got going on here. Yeah, hey, caller, you're live on the air. Go ahead.
I just came across your show. I heard you mention quality leadership and that. I'm actually a global visionary, bringing forth some very powerful strategies that can't be stopped and that will plug up the money pipelines to the elites and force them to change their ways until they're dealt with legally.
So you're saying you actually have such a strategy?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, please share it. Please share.
A big website, and then I have a business partner who's a cybersecurity expert who handles this website for me, as well as other social media. My name is Hugh, H-U-G-H. The last name Carlson is spelled T like Tom, R-A-U-L-S-E-N like Nancy. The easiest way to get to the website is to simply Google 3 words. The first word, my Weebly.com. I actually share common background with the president. I look to help any president's office unite the country properly, but he's on his path. I'm on mine. I certainly don't agree with trade wars. That's a whole paradigm based on control and corruption. You take any big manufactured products, that all the component parts, they're all over the world. It's not just being manufactured in one country.
Yes.
I don't think people even understand that.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. It's It's to be. So what is your plan?
Well, I have a business partner, again, who controls the site for me. There's a page on their business opportunities. I'm strategizing with a package of video products that's from a company set up as an MLM, which a lot of people don't want to be involved with. But
I mean, well, specifically, what would you do? I mean, as far as China is concerned, do you have like a unique perspective on that? I mean, you were talking about having sort of a differing opinion.
I'm interviewed on the business opportunities page and other things you'll come across on YouTube. What I'm looking to do, using video products, I look at a video newsletter as one of the most powerful vehicles that can be utilized not only to hold a customer base, but to attract new people and to create win-win-win situations all the way around with transparency. I say in essence today that every day you buy a product, it's election day. You're casting a vote for the manufacturer of that product. And that you can today have the best product, the best customer service. It's no longer enough. You have to be good to your employees, your customers, the environment, and give back to the community in ethical, legal, moral ways. Otherwise, as these strategies take hold, you're going to be found out just exactly who you are and what you're doing. I say if you're buying lead-based painted toys out of China through Walmart, your kids don't have a choice, but you do. A lot of people don't know it's available on the internet to see. Walmart paid a fine of $82 million. They were dumping pesticides down storm drains. So the accountability is coming with things like blockchain, where once you do a transaction, it's there as a permanent record and it can't be changed. And that's where the transparency is going to shift everything. So
Right.
the big corporations, they're all control-based and greed-based, unless they're starting to recognize that their employees are an asset instead of a liability. They're falling apart already. Since the turn of the century, half of the Fortune 500 companies are no longer in existence. So they can't keep up with what the social media is doing. In fact, it's actually carrying a oil company. And in the brief conversation I had with them, I said, you have middle managers in your corporation you think that are doing due diligence as they sit at their workstations, but how do you know that they're not brokering opportunities to benefit themselves, their friends and family? So it's already happening. So they can put all the controls on the people, but they're not tapping into their creativity and benefiting from it. That's where my strategy is totally different. Instead of a long rectangular table in the corporate boardroom, you're going to have a circular table where everybody's contributing and brainstorming and benefiting and bringing forth the best type of company for everyone involved, including the customers, the suppliers, and the environment, and everything.
Yeah, employee relations. I was writing a little bit about that, lately, put on my blog, how important that is. It does kind of seem that there's a sort of a premium. There will be a premium on ethical behavior anyway, but yeah, it does. It doesn't. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell with the climate where the environment we're in right now. But no, I would agree with you that I think. I mean, it's kind of almost. I don't. It's kind of hard to see, like I said, with the way the environment is. But I agree with you very much. I think there's.
Well, the environment, we've had catastrophic environments over the eons or whatever. But the big thing that people have to really look at, and this is where the consciousness is rising globally, is the spirituality. That's coming into play into everything now.
Yes.
And when you get down to basics, even an atheist can't deny the fact that they came from spirit.
Right.
And we're here for a very short time. 100 years is like the blink of an eye in terms of eternity. We're going to go back into spirit. And I say we're fully accountable for everything we do here. And the material goods have absolutely no use in the spiritual realm. So that's where people have to learn how to be self-empowered. And love is God energy. That's the most powerful energy there is. That's why mainstream media, I say there's four big areas that are really controlling and manipulating people. It's big business, mainstream media, the government, and the religions, and they're all tied in together. So you have to get in front of your mirror and say, who's really controlling me? And
Yes,
get in touch with your higher self or your creator and just co-create with your creator. And this is an untapped area. Everybody has a network. Your family is a network.
Mm-hmm.
So start monetizing your network. And when you go to networking events, it's not passing out your business card saying, hey, buy from me. It's learning what the other person's interests are, and especially people that can become mentors for you. I had mentors that were very high level that appreciated me because I was looking to help them.
Yeah.
And I even had a gentleman I discussed in the interview. He was more renowned in the business management and marketing at David D. Seltz. And he told me, use my credentials when you're approaching people. I said, I can't do that. I'm not you.
Yeah.
He said, no, just to get an initial interest. And once they reach that interest, then just tell them that you were actually representing me. I got a check in the mail one day from Mr. Seltz, and I didn't know what it was for. I called him up, and he said it was for part of his fee that he charged somebody that came to him through me, and I didn't even remember who that person was.
Oh, okay.
That's honesty. That's beautiful.
Yep.
And that can be done to this day. And it doesn't require contracts, but it's really being empathic towards other people that you come into contact with, and then using the discernment. I say time will always show where somebody's coming from. On that big website I gave you, Rooting Out Corruption, there's a front page Wall Street Journal article with attachments from 1983 that I was written up in. It triggered an investigation that eventually led to the resignation of Jim Wright from Speaker of the House in shame, the third highest office in the country. The article back then beautifully described how special interests and lobbyists have totally corrupted Washington. It was before Ross Perot talked about it, but due to apathy and people not knowing what to do or how to do it, that's why the elites think they have us in the stranglehold where we are right now. And that back in 1983, that was around the S&L banking scandal. There's been attempts to collapse the economy.
Yes.
The elites love chaos. Whatever way they can create it, that will help them get their agenda done. They'd love to have a Gestapo force start putting people into the camps, and then if you don't go along with having a chip implant,
right,
you'll have to get me going to sleep for that one, because I'm not going to be somebody else's robot. But I don't have the fear, and in fact, I've said in interviews, and this is where again it gets into spirituality, God has harmonics, which are sound waves. I said that when they come, you could be an elite sitting on your yacht in the Mediterranean sipping a pina colada. You might spontaneously combust or explode. The same thing if you're in an underground bunker somewhere, because God's harmonics will go where God wants.
So are you referring to the Are you referring to the solfeggio scale? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, it could be something like that, exactly.
Okay.
So the radio host said, "Aren't you afraid of retribution?" I said, "For what? I didn't do anything wrong." They did.
Yeah.
I said, "If they have a hitman take me out, I asked God to let me eat the hitman's brains out, and the spirit won't be quite painful. I'll be more gentle on him than the guy who hired him." So
Right.
again, we're all going to go back to the spirit. So I put the fear on them. There's no reason to fear anything. If you have the right kind of heart to God alignment, just understand that you're here to be a blessing and be mentored by people who are doing that. And as you are blessed, then you should be
Yeah, that sounds. I agree wholeheartedly.
Right, and it needs to be done, but again, people, and I understand, I've been through so much in my life, you'll see from that big website, that's such a bizarre life, but
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna check that out. Can you read that again?
yes,
Was
the
that?
easiest way is just to put 3 words, my last name, Charleston, again, that's spelled T like Tom,
Oh, okay.
Raulsen like Nancy, then put the word and then Trump, Trump. Well, the actual website is www.rootingoutcorruption.weebly.com. Usually when I give the website, it takes people 10 times and they still can't bring it up unless they keep the words and the dots all in the right place connected together. So, but it will come right up if you Google.
Okay, but I just put it in the. Now this brings up a question here. I know you have a presence on the internet here, but I was wondering if you, because I just went to Google. I mean, I haven't tried Bing yet or anything, but I typed in Tarleton Trump, and it just started taking me to Tucker Carlson stuff.
No, you're probably not spelling it right. It's Charleston. The first letter is T like Tom, then RAULS like Sam, E like Edward, N like.
Oh, okay. All right. Let me see here.
Always misspelling it. They think it's the candy bar, Charleston, or this or that. No, TRAULSEN and AND, and then.
Okay, I'm sorry. TRAU.
TRAULS like Sam, E like Edward, N like Nancy.
Okay, Charleston.
My last name has global recognition already. Charleston refrigerators are all over the world.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Whistleblower. All right.
Yeah, they're in hotels, hospitals,
Where?
schools, restaurants.
Okay.
Trump has them in his hotels or even in the White House kitchen. I'm the firstborn child of the founder and did work for the company years ago. I'm looking to feed people body, mind, and spirit and tamp down the chaos and bring forth a whole better present and future for mankind.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize. I should have just went there to begin with when you first started talking, but yeah, I'm there right now. Yeah, but that raised a question. I was just wondering if you come across, have you come across any censorship? Since you obviously have some sort of presence on the internet here, I was just wondering if.
Well, I thank God for the person that's handling that website as well as some other social media. There's a Twitter page, a Facebook page, a picture of me with my finger on a big marble ball or globe, and a LinkedIn page. He's a cybersecurity expert that I have
Oh, okay.
on the site. So he knows how to put the blocks up, and there is a blog on the homepage, Creativity.
Well, it's good. Definitely good to have a friend like that, huh?
I'm sorry?
That's definitely a good friend to have.
Well, that's how I'm blessed.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to see things that I discuss in interviews, actually, too, on the page that says media review. You'll see a couple of book jackets. So I love pointing that out to the socialist types. If you think communism is a better way of life, take a good look at that page. And there's a book titled The KGB, The Eyes of Russia, written by a high-level CIA operative, Harry Rositzky, who I spoke with, as well as the other author of the books of file back in the early 80s. And both books were helpful to me in exposing this guy, Dr. Paul Science, that I did in the front page Wall Street Journal article. I believe he was a rogue CIA operative, and they're not supposed to be operating in our homeland, but they do.
Okay, so yeah, I'm there. What about this? What's the deal with this Maya Angelou interview? Did you actually have her? Did you interview her?
I called into a radio program that she was on, and I had the pleasure of speaking with her about a poem I authored. On the homepage there's a blog, creativity777.com. The poem is titled Caring Sharing. I dedicated it to my wife. It's in the President Ronald Reagan Library. It's been discussed as a weapon against terrorism, and she had kind words to say about my poem. So I had my partner set that up on a presentation that people can listen to. Brandon, who's also mentioned on the Charleston and Trump page. To me, she's like a living Statue of Liberty, and she's a member of the Transformational Leadership Council, upon which the movie The Secret was based. That's Jack Canfield's organization, the Chicken Soup Books.
All right. So yeah, I can. So yeah, I was just I mean, I'm assuming. Okay, so this plan, this proposal you're working on. I mean, I'm assuming it's very, very advanced. But you're saying it's all very complex. I mean, very complex. I meant, but I was wondering.
How to think creatively.
Pardon me.
It's very simple. It's just that people aren't acclimated to thinking creatively. They're caught up in the matrix. It's just beyond the age of reason. They're conditioned into everything, and that's where, to me, it's almost a comedy show to see this president. It's so sad to see him so deep into his ego that I don't know how it's all going to pan out, but I'm still willing to help him if he wants to empower the people properly in our country. But
Yes.
he seems to feel he's the chosen one, and nothing can be done unless it's done in his way, and that's not what America is.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, I just wanted. So what? I mean, how would you handle things differently with, say, with China? I mean, as far as with the trade wars goes, and using tariffs to to get them to do what you will. I mean,
you have to do a little research on there. I even have a couple of articles on there. One is titled USA Unlimited Solutions Always, and another one, America's New Transformational Economy, based upon cows. They're brief articles, but it really gets into where people can open their minds and learn how to start empowering themselves, and starting in the local communities, start networking with each other. But I even went so far in the future as to say, instead of Olympics where you have games, why don't we have a global business Olympics where every country in the world can bring forth their best company to show how that they're good to their employees, their customers, the environment, and giving back to the community or humanity. And that way, you're not just having people even in the physical Olympics, there are always controversies of who's being drugged to get a special edge.
yeah.
Now, this is all transparent and ethical, and people that are handicapped can take part in these and help the companies in their own country bring forth their best company to show it off to the whole world. And then I have ideas to franchise the whole information age globally. I mean, you say something like Starbucks that are all over the world, turn that into local centers that people can come to and network. They do to some degree now, but in a way that it can be done locally with an internet site where they can present business opportunities and do deals, and even have live TV shows where they're closing deals right on the air.
Okay, but you know this almost seems like there's sort of a double-edged sword, though, because I think of a cyberpunk scenario where, I mean, yeah, that you were saying about the chip or whatever, and where I guess relying on artificial intelligence is too much, but we do seem to be coming to a, I mean, with the I don't know, the singularity, if you will, the one that they talk about, like in 250, the year 2050. So. I mean, I get what you're saying, but in a way, wouldn't that it does seem to be we're kind of heading in that direction naturally.
Well,
even you know.
The beauty of what I'm doing, this the elites can't stop.
Okay.
My strategies can't be stopped as they take hold and grow because they're not centralized and they're not ego based.
Okay.
So they can do whatever they think they can, but when you're on the right kind of spiritual path, anything can happen.
No, I get what you're saying. I understand. Yeah, I understand what you're saying now. I forgot you were putting the spirituality at the base. That would seem to kind of.
It is for everything,
yeah.
And that's what will transform everything, and that's where people have to come to a realization of.
I get what you're saying. As long as that is your base, you don't.
Doing what they like.
Right. As long as that is your base, you don't really have to fear the technology or the cyberpunk implants and stuff like that.
I do like to put humor wherever I can, too,
Yeah.
just to open people's minds more. But you seem to be tech savvy. Do you, with all the artificial intelligence, robotics, and automation, do you know what a robot uses to eat guacamole?
No, I have no idea.
Computer chips.
Oh man, that's horrible.
You gotta have some humor in life, right?
Yeah, definitely. Computer chips.
These children that are being born now are very savvy with the open-mindedness and ways to come together. So
Yes.
behind the scenes, if you're able to look at what's going on the internet instead of focusing on the mainstream media, you'll see so much happening that's beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of made that conscious decision. Well, years back. I mean, the total. I guess in the morning I'll watch like that, just some stupid local news show where they talk about traffic and weather. But yeah, then aside from that, I mean, just kind of when I'm getting up. But so yeah, aside from that, I just can't. I can't stomach. I guess I made that decision. I don't know, several years back, maybe 3 years back or so. But I always kind of turned away from it. The sort of mainstream media. I always kind of knew there was something funny about it, something, that I just didn't like on a gut instinctual level. But I guess it was about 3 years ago that I just kind of, I don't have anything to do with it at all anymore. Just any of the more mainstream sources of media, I just tend to shy away from. And yeah, so I try to use as many alternate sources as I can to get my information and, just never.
Well, the other thing too is you have to use the discernment to make sure that you're looking at factual-based documents, because that's the other big problem, that people are just buying to sound bites, whatever resonates with them.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, you got to have that discernment but.
Yeah, that's why on the page that has a Wall Street Journal article with attachments, there's a memo that triggered the whole thing. And the person, Dr. Paul Science, when he was questioned, denied ever sending it to me, but his signature could have determined it. He did that through handwriting analysis, so then he did admit that he was lying. And the other thing, the beauty of spirituality, is he actually came up and met me in New York, and I had a workers' comp hearing at the time. He was visiting me that he attended with me, and they went around the hearing room taking an inventory of the people in the room, and he said he was representing me as my attorney. He also denied that, but it's in the Wall Street Journal article, and hearing record picked it up. He was guilty of a misdemeanor just from that.
Oh man.
So that's the beauty. When I let go and let God, I have no control of what can happen. So anybody that wants to take a negative approach with me, I was even arrested from my bed after I was disabled. I've never been arrested for anything in my life. I think I broke up the start of a witch's coven in the former senior independent apartment building I was living in, and the head of it had a son who was a sergeant on the county police force. Got two weak-minded women that claimed I was stalking them. They had fear of their lives for a couple of months. It was total BS. And that's all discussed on the Ananda Love page, and I reference it also on the Twitter page recently. And the corrupt police sergeant is now dead, as well as some of the guys that set me up. I never asked that. I forgive everybody. I'm not looking to sue anybody, but I definitely want my story told, and the women that are still
and there's nothing wrong with wanting to. There's nothing wrong with wanting to keep your own skin safe too. I mean, as far as if bad things happen to those people, I mean, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, they take on that karma. Yeah, exactly. So the law of attraction is pretty simple and basic. What you put out, you get back. So why wouldn't you want to put out anything else except things that are positive that come back to you?
Well, that's an awfully good question. I mean, it seems like something that's very obvious. I guess.
They're just too focused on the But as I say, well, you think everything you see is solid, put your hand under a very powerful microscope, you'll see it's not solid at all. Everything is energy. We're energy. The big question is, what are you doing with your energy? Are you using it in a positive or negative way?
Yeah, it's true. But yeah, that's
what.
what.
To keep you distracted, or anything they can do to keep you distracted, to have racial problems or ball games or this or that. I mean, it's so high tech today. Some people, and I know it's out there happening. A father will come home after his 8-hour workday, think he did a tough work day or something. I worked 100-hour weeks for many years, and they'll say, let me have my beer in the ball game. You can take this iPod in the other room, go play with the pedophiles. Don't bother me.
Yeah, it's that's yeah, and I guess that's another thing too. I mean, what do you see happening there? I mean, I've often thought, I kind of resonate with a lot of stuff you're saying. I felt a lot of the same way myself, and I haven't done anything to the extent you're doing, but I've done a lot of writing on my own personal blog, sort of, with espousing the same things. But that's one thing I've noticed is that
So I congratulate you for that, and just ask for divine guidance, whatever you feel you're here to do. Because I say, I never. If I talked to you a few years ago and said what I said I'm doing now, I would have said you're absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
It's all my life experience. I was meant to have everything happen to me to awaken me at different stages, so that I now function as a way shower and a phoenix rising. But I say the stories aren't all about me. It's about me showing you how my faith in God has seen me through some pretty heavy duty life experiences.
Yeah, definitely. But my question was, well, how do you? Because I've thought this, we've got a big obstacle as far as people being literally under a spell, being hypnotized by the TV and all the other forms of modern mainstream media. I mean, it's like Plato's cave. And I mean, it's exactly like Plato's cave, this TV. And it's like, if you tell people, and like in Plato's cave, Socrates was asking, what do you, these people will kill you if you try to tell them this is all an illusion, and you should come out and go look at the sun. They're like, well, we should probably kill this guy. You don't. I mean, people would. I mean, they know it's a fiction. They almost know it's a fictional reality. They know it's some kind of drug and escape. But if you try to take that away from the people, I don't. How do you see that resolving itself? I mean, is it a slow process?
When you see the heavy duty stuff that I've been through, they're listening to me. They've been listening to me for years, and I caution them because of my agreement with God. You're going to pay a heavy price. I'll be more powerful back in spirit. So you better listen to me and start straightening your own life out before you go back in the spirit and face your accountability. So it starts at the most simplest, basic levels, and it doesn't have to be a big, grandiose thing like I'm doing. I did say in an interview a very simple example of just accomplishing a mission in life. When I first got out of the Air Force back in 1968, I stayed with my grandmother in a rent-controlled apartment in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. They didn't have washer and dryers in the building in those days. I went to a local laundromat. When I finished doing my laundry, as I was starting to leave, I noticed a little old lady coming and held the door open for her and wished her good morning. And she burst into tears, and it felt like a knife went right in my gut. I felt so sorry that I might have offended her somehow, and that's what I said to her. I said, I'm sorry, did I say something wrong or do something wrong? And she said, no, nobody had been so kind to her. So if that was my whole mission in life, I accomplished it beautifully. So it doesn't have to be big and grandiose, but just do something in a positive way as opposed to negative, because, again, whether you believe it or not, and I don't know about reincarnations, maybe the people keep coming back to learn those lessons, to keep progressing, to stop abusing and killing and whatever. And when you start really investigating all these wars, these are contrived by global elites. I'm going to give you a name because I don't stay in the negative, but this guy, there are people that have studied these elites for years. He's available to be seen on YouTube. His name is James Perloff, Perllff. And that would be a real eye-opener just to see what they're doing. But I'm not concerned that you said something that was very interesting before, that these things can be a double-edged sword, some of the strategies I have. Yes, they can be to a point, but eventually the transparency will sort all that out. So they can't.
That's what I was saying. I sort of, while you were mentioning all of that, I forgot if you sort of come at things from a spiritual basis, then all the stuff, other kind of stuff works itself out. But
let's look at where we're at right now. I mean, I'm a firm believer of just having the right to bear arms or whatever. I was a hunter for many years. I choose not to have a weapon at this point. I really don't need one. If people are dying because they flew with me in a negative way, that was their choice.
Yeah.
I didn't have to put a gun on it. But all right, so if you take all the guns away from people, let's go back into the Bible. Where did it all start with Cain and Abel? What about those knives? Should we take all the knives away?
Yeah.
You can even kill somebody with paper cuts, I guess. So
Yeah.
where does this all stop?
Yep. So, no, I was just,
And
I mean, do you foresee, like, I just meant as far as the media machine goes.
to be all worked out too, because there are corrupt police and there are Gestapo police. I support the police. My life was saved by the police in New York, yet I was set up by a corrupt police sergeant and arrested from my bed when I'm down here in Virginia as a disabled person. So
Yeah.
that all has to be looked at very carefully because I just, again, with the fear, people have to learn to know that you can get what's called a game over sign at any point in your life. So just keep that in mind every day, and just each day. And I also give this out. This would be good for people to be aware of. Put the devices down. Just go out and appreciate nature, which I say is God's classroom. That will lower your stress level and heighten your awareness when you look around and see all the beautiful flowers, the trees, listening to the birds. They're singing because they're happy because God gave them everything they needed. And God will do the same to you. So you have the right kind of heart to God connection. What you can't handle, let go and let God handle it. But your faith has to be rock solid. You can't waver.
Okay, so do you really foresee a time when are we talking about the fall of the New World Order and all of that, or I mean that whole system?
On the website on the blog creativity777.com, I have an equation SOS, which stands for spirituality plus opportunity equals success. To me, that's the New World Order. All the other stuff that's going on now, where they're carving up the world. That's why a lot of people don't look at our president the way I see him behind the scenes. And again, I'll never interact with him behind closed doors. I would love to interact with him to a third party. Let him say what he has to say, and I'll say what I have to say, and let's see where that goes. But in either way, I don't understand why he is cozying up to absolute murderers with this North Korean guy and Putin and whatever. They're terrible people. So,
I think a lot of times his followers do get to they sort of follow into an identity politics thing where they say that they claim that they hate or whatever, but he's definitely got his weaknesses. Yeah, I think it's one of those lesser of two evil things, but I don't. It's that I know I can see what you're saying. I know what you're talking about. You're the real new.
Campaigning in 2016, and I have it on the Twitter page and also at the top of the Charleston Trump page. I addressed it, but it's on video. He made his hand like a gun, son, even though he didn't originate the words, he did go along with it. He said I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. It would affect the loyalty of my voters. My business partner is very pro-Trump. And he said, well, you're taking it out of context. I said, I don't take anything out of context. I'm taking the words that came out of his mouth, the exact words out of his mouth. He could have said, people love me so much, they kiss my feet, they worship me. He did not say that. He said, I could shoot somebody. I immediately challenged that, and I said I would be proud to stand on Fifth Avenue as a veteran representing this country and allow him to shoot me. I said, I don't think it will happen. It's illegal in America, but if it ever did, I think he'd lose most of, if not all, his voters. So I will help him. I will help any president in office, but I don't see anybody doing what the real true president that was empowering the people. Look what he got for his trouble was John F. Kennedy, but he said something so interesting and holds true to this day. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I'm looking actively right now to shift this whole presidential election to show that fighting and arguing, nobody ever wins an argument. So all candidates and all voters instead go into a whole new thought process of bringing forth solutions with respect in your local communities and the states and our country and for the whole world. That will tamp down the chaos and manifest a better present future.
Yeah, so I could definitely agree with you there. We get a whole new paradigm of cooperation going. Yeah, so that's it's what Orwell says, something about telling the truth is a revolutionary act in times of, I forgot, but
the truth will set you free. The truth will set you free.
So, all right, well, hey, I want to thank.
They don't want the truth. They can't handle it. They can't, our country's done some pretty nasty things behind the scenes globally too. I addressed that.
Yeah.
So the transparency has to come through everything.
Yeah, like you were saying, there will be people who just can't handle the truth. I mean, we hate to be cliche and steal that line from that movie, but it's so true. I mean, so.
Well, we're again addressing even religions. I say unless a religion is bringing you to a personal heart-to-God relationship, it's just a third-party manipulator. If all the religions on the planet function properly, nobody would be deprived of clean water, food, and proper shelter. So they just are begging for money for their own enrichment. 10 seconds. I had to laugh. It's sad in a way that when they had the Notre Dame Cathedral fire, how all of a sudden corporations came around and raised $1 billion, yet people within the view of that cathedral are probably starving to death.
All right, well, hey, Hugh, thanks for calling in. I got to end the show here. I got to move along.
Right.
But thanks a lot for calling in. And
to keep my number and explore the website, you can go back to the internet to my partner, Dave Solano.
yeah, I'm there at the site right now. You want to get that site out again? And I'm sorry, what?
Well, the easiest way is just to put 3 words, my last name, Carlson. Again, that's first letter is T like Tom, then RAULSEN like Nancy, then the word and, A-N-D, and then Trump, Trump. You can also just put my name, Q-H-E-H, Carlson, Traulsen on YouTube or Google it. It will bring up all kinds of interviews and websites. And I thank you for giving me the time. And as I get off too, I say that if people can't do anything else, they can say a prayer that will help raise the consciousness, and God will put the ego in check where it needs to be. Thank you very much, and God bless everyone, and may God always bless America.
Thank you, Hugh. All right, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in to the big show.